Welcome back to Strong by Science. Today, a very special guest, Dr. Mike Israetel, scientific doctor, sports science doctor. And you've been talking about exercise science and how to train on your channel for a long time now. In that time, you've certainly coached and seen many science-based lifters train. In this video, I want to discuss what mistakes science-based lifters make and whether or not exercise science is killing your gains. First off, what mistakes do you see science-based lifters make?
Great question. A lot of these mistakes come out not of directly accessing science, but of the demographic of people that tend to access science first. A lot of science-based lifters are people that are analytical. They're particular. They're specific. And some of them are a little bit obsessive compulsive, and some of them are downright neurotic. And they tend to secrete a lot of area under the curve of cortisol, thinking should they do sets of 6 or sets of 7 today. Meanwhile, the bros don't feel any cortisol because they just do fuck all. And that is definitely a situation in which just relaxing more, putting together a good plan you've looked over once and not second guessing yourself all the time, paralysis by analysis, that can save a lot of science-based lifters a lot of enjoyment, give them better results because they're not freaking out all the time. And that is, I think, a thing that can be really taken well. The spirit of science is experimentation. You try something, it works or it doesn't. You try something else, it works or it doesn't. You analyze the magnitude of effect between the two, you move on. And that's great. But a lot of people like to treat their bodies more as laboratories and less as final products. If I have an F-35 fighter from the United States, stealth fighter, and it's a test platform, we just keep it in the fucking hangar. We can rip parts out of it. We can put parts in. We don't care that it flies better or worse, or that it has no avionics anymore, or it doesn't have weapon systems. We want to really try some big shit. So we can spend like 12 weeks trying to stuff a cruise missile in there and rip out tons of the guts. Is that good for the plane? Is it bad for me? We don't care. We're very scientific. Whereas if you have frontline combat ready F-35 fighters, you don't fuck with them. They're approved for a certain loadout that you have, certain missiles you can put on it. You know how to upgrade and update the avionics. You check up on it. You wipe it real nice every time. And there it sits until it's ready to go to war, because the level of preparedness has to be high. So you just don't muck with it a lot. Whatever process we've established for, run the process, run the process, run the process. All the way down to how you handle battlefield engagements. There's a process for stuff. Now, of course, there's room for creativity, but not a ton. You look at your body. Are you a test vehicle? Yes. But you don't want to be an F-35 with the fucking front cut out. And someone's like, does that fly? You're like, no, it's not flying right now. You look at your own body and you're like, well, I've tried a bunch of programs that don't work. And I switch so fast between programs, I can't really tell what's working. I get a little bit of inkling, but I'm more of a test platform, an experiment, than I am a design element. I'm sure as they build a new iPhone, they experiment with a lot of stuff. But once they design the final design, they don't experiment much with it. They make you an incredible phone. And when you're flexing in the gym, you want to be that incredible final model iPhone. You don't want to be the thing with fucking screws hanging out. So yes, it's good to experiment, but don't turn that into psychotic program hopping. If you do something similar in sequence over and over for weeks on end, months even, and you slightly increase the stimulus by increasing load or reps or maybe even volume in some contexts, that's the underlying way to make most of your gains. And there's tons of time to see what works and what doesn't, but you don't want to try something new so often that you do two things. One, you don't allow the process enough time to accrete as much muscle as it would. And two, you might not even allow the process enough time to tell you if it's reliably good at growing muscle or not. You just kind of get the switch to this, switch to that. That happens in a few ways. One, you may just be availed to a lot of literature and you try a lot of stuff. Two is you're reading through literature for the first time and you're like, oh, this new thing. I got to myoreps finally in Dr. Mike's book about muscle. I'm going to try all myoreps next week. Or as new studies come out, you're going to try new stuff. And I would have a different approach to recommend to people. Build a program on really core foundations of things we know pretty goddamn well. And as new stuff comes out, to quote you, actually, I'm stealing this quote, don't be an early adopter. Because most new things in the science-based lifting world, they don't end up getting replicated. Literally, most new things are just a flash in the pan. You don't want to be the guy that tried every fucking new thing and has nothing to show for it. But as evidence accretes longer and longer, a few studies, a few years, then you're going to try it, but you're going to try it in a way in which you conserve most of the elements of your program. And you, one or two elements you replace with this new thing. See how it goes. For a while, give it a long time. Then you're giving a long time for the thing to cook. You're doing really well with it. And you're seeing some change, but not so many changes that stochastic process. You can't detect what's doing what. Now you have some interesting causal inference where you could say, oh, I'm actually learning something. And you get the benefit of like only inheriting things that seem to pretty fucking well work instead of like, hey, this new study on calves, GK, it doesn't work. And you're like, the fuck did I spend 6 weeks on this stupid study if it was going to come out and the next study says, actually, it's all bonkers. So it's cool to be science-based, but I would use science more as an engineer building a functional weapon system than I would as an engineer at a weapons factory that's like, wait, I can break this up and put it down, doesn't matter. You want to make gains or do you want to practice what strategies are best? Remember, the people in exercise science studies, they're not there to make gains. They're there to show us mechanisms. Mm-hmm. So moving on to my next thing about how exercise science can get screwed up. Using published study designs for any of their features, workout length, program design, what are we doing Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, exercise selection, cadence, using workouts from the lab verbatim in the gym, in whole or in part. That is not what exercise science is supposed to do. Anytime we test anything in exercise science, the thing we get out of it is a distillment of incrementally more easily visible conceptual frameworks. So if I see a study on length and partials that was done on cable flies, and I see next week people are doing cable flies with length and partials in the gym, I'm just like, oh my God. But if the fourth study on length and partials in multiple muscles shows that they work well, and I see you using length and partials on a dumbbell fly because you absorb the concept of it and you're trying it out, you get a slow clap from me. Now, is there anything wrong with piecemeal taking parts of exercise science study designs and putting them in your program? Not really, really. You should know your program so well and have it really well organized such that you're finicky about doing anything too crazy or too new. You want to take from an exercise science study the lesson that it distills for you at the end, which for most single studies is a hint. Mm-hmm. For aggregates of studies and meta-analysis, it's a good guess. You take the lesson and you apply it, as opposed to taking the exact thing that study revealed. For example, the 52-set quad study, infamous. People will say things like, I'm really supposed to do 52 sets of quads to get big. These exercise scientists are crazy. No, you're just not that smart. If you read the study and you read the other studies that it is similar to, we have Ranielli and colleagues, Brad and colleagues' replication of that. There's like 4 other studies. What that study tells us conceptually is that before you stop at 20 sets per week for a muscle and say, hey, anything north of this is just nonsense, I'm going to break down and die, consider the fact that multiple studies have found 20 to 30, 30 to 40, even 40 plus sets in some context to be effective. Now, that's an interesting concept. Now, I notice my lateral raises and my side delt work, I'm easily doing 25 sets a week, and they're growing, they're getting tired, but I know I can beat them up more. Hey, try add some volume. That's what you get out of that 52-set study. It's just a piece of a puzzle, and the puzzle is still a concept. It's not like, okay, so I do 52 sets now? And I've literally had people ask, like, is 52 sets the number now? I'm like, pencil in the eye. And I'm kidding. I don't get mad about it. But the literalism of taking out of studies exact things and going, we're going to do this, that's not what studies are for. They can't be for that because you weren't in the study. Are you a recreationally trained 22-year-old undergrad from Uppsala University in Sweden? No.
You found me out. That's really
why would I be that? How dare you? So the literalism is a fucking problem. And kind of taking it all together, exercise science, direct studies on exercises, nutritional stuff and everything is supposed to, over multiple studies, from multiple slightly different perspectives, give us a consilience of understanding about some deeper concepts, concepts which we take to our own programming, carefully look over, apply sort of one at a time for long lengths of time to try to see changes. That is taking exercise science and funneling it into sports science. I have a PhD in sports science, not exercise science. My job is to make individual athletes better while they're in their sport and doing it. We can't play around and, we'll do this and we'll do that. It has to be calculated, it has to be strategic, and we have to work on concepts instead of, is it 52 sets or is it 9 sets? So no, the concept is there is a broad range of volumes that work, and on average higher volumes work better than lower volumes if you can recover. But it's annoying to remember all that. Can I just say 52? You can, if you want to hold the honest position, belief-wise, that exercise science is nonsense. It's totally nonsense if you don't understand it. If you understand it, it's an awesome tool that complements theoretical knowledge from earlier, your own personal experience, and the wisdom of other coaches and athletes. You add direct empirical data to that, and you got one hell of a sword and one hell of a shield. But if you try to stab people with your shield and use your sword to block spears, you're doing it wrong.
Sure. So, just to summarize, it sounds like you view exercise science or sports science as a means to glean at broader principles, or at average truths.
Yes.
Obviously, we're not going to arrive at an average truth right away, or what have you, but it's a way to arrive at that versus purely making the inference that 52 sets is better than 32 sets. It's
100%.
More than that. One question I would have for you, a common claim is made that you can't use exercise science studies and apply the findings to your training. You can't form a training around exercise science. Do you think that's true?
So first of all, you can. You can just copy the studies they did, copy the program they did in the research design, and just do that. You'll get some fine gains. If you're appraising the studies properly, I would highly advise you that to the extent that you want to make the best programs, you should be aware of the meta-analytic distillation of all studies ever conducted in that field, because you don't want someone to surprise you with like, hey, what about like length and position? And you're like, what's that? You're like, I think muscles grow more when they're stressed in a lengthened state. You're like, I never heard of that. I'm like, okay. Wow. It's been around a while. You should look into it. So it's definitely true that if you go about it in a way of just sampling bullshit, you can still get fine gains, and some of those gains will be just as good as bro gains. The problem with exercise science done that way is you're not getting a great program together because you didn't use concepts, principles, and averages. You just used random cherry-pick bullshit. And also sometimes you ignore intuition because, you're not recovering from 3 leg workouts a week at 15 sets each. And you're like, but the 52 study said, and then you just keep going. And the bros are like, dude, you feel like shit, you should take a break. And you're like, the subjects in the study did 12 weeks straight. That would be a problem. Literalism is a big problem. But if you're using it properly, and you take exercise science and you apply it in a way that it's a tentative thing, it's a guess, but it's a good guess, then you're well on your way. For example, you take the research on training to failure. Many people in many studies trained all the way to muscular failure, got a certain amount of growth. Many people in those studies trained to some prescribed reps in reserve, let's say 2 or 3 reps in reserve, and they got a certain amount of growth. We also know that people in exercise science studies train very hard because they're under direct supervision. People are yelling at them. They train a lot harder than most people do in the gym. They train harder than most IFB pros because you're not in a study and there's 3 undergrads yelling at you. What the fuck is going on here? Am I safe even? Mm-hmm. You can start to piece together that those people probably go pretty close to failure in real life. But let's say that we were even skeptical of that. Let's say the guys that do 3 reps in reserve really do 6 reps in reserve in exercise science studies. And the people doing 0 reps in reserve or failure really have 3 reps in reserve. Very well. So when you look at the volume equated literature, you notice that it's not even true to say that failure is superior. If you have 3 sets of submaximal, 2 reps in reserve, and 3 sets of failure, they on average give you basically the same gains. If that's true at 3 and 6, in reality, it's probably going to be even more true at 0 and 3. Because 6 reps in reserve is so goddamn far from failure that you can't have both. Once you have a situation where you've realized that, and there's like 19 total studies over 10 years, you're going to come away with the following distillation, hypothesis that you can go now test in the real world. As long as I'm pushing it pretty close to failure, how close to failure I get is probably not a major determinative factor. So if I handle fatigue well and I love training to failure, send it. If I'm really beat up by failure training and I don't like doing it and I seem to get really good results training submaximally, but everyone tells me I should go to failure, I'm going to stop doing it because science tells me it does not fucking matter within a close enough range. That's how you would use exercise science. If you're using it in a way to just copy a program you saw out of a fucking thing, you're going to have problems.
It sounds like you use empirical science as the sort of foundation to determine where to start. And then practical considerations, context, etc.
Autoregulation.
To guide you from there.
Correct.
Okay, final question for my end would be, do you think exercise science is killing your gains?
Yes, because it makes great thumbnails. Exercise science is killing your gains. If you think that reading study abstracts someone reposted on Reddit till 2 a.m. is going to let you figure out some way to become way more jacked. If you use exercise science as a way to every year or two brush up on what's the standard best practices in terms of averages, like what typical number of sets per week lead to best growth, and concepts, volume and growth have a positive curvilinear relationship, things like that, you can make programs that at least do one thing. They don't run totally afoul of very well understood science. And then the rest is on heuristics and intuition and your own feel. Maybe you'll get all that wrong and still not make gains, or your genetics suck and still don't make gains. But at least you can make whatever gains you were going to make without just doing some dumb shit that's backwards. Let me give you a quick example. Let's say that you were under the impression that glutamine supplementation was net anabolic to muscle protein tissue. You just took glutamine for years. You just never looked into it. You're going to feel a certain way when you find out that from the beginning glutamine sucked. Look at the science. And at least don't take shit science as like, dude, we've given this to random groups of people for generations and nothing happens to anyone. At least look at that. So you don't have to read every study. You don't have to be a nerd. You can just ask ChatGPT. What do you think about like training to failure compared to not failure? How comparable are they? If it's like, look, it's not a big deal either way, you can train either way you want. Just know that if you surf Reddit for 18 hours looking at failure versus non-failure studies, you're not getting jacked, nor are you learning anything incrementally much more insightful than that. But also, if you think every single set should be taken to wartime failure and it's fucking your body up and causing you to like think you need to quit training, maybe you should have looked into that.
Exercise science can be a nice way to test certain things you otherwise wouldn't be able to. The glutamine example you gave, there is not really a practical way to determine whether or not that does anything.
Totally.
Could you look at different athletes taking glutamine and others that don't and try to make the inference of, oh, these people seem to see better results? Maybe, but the effect is so small that you would never be able to practically detect it.
How would you even be able to measure it? Yeah. You're like writing letters to people's homes. Hello, do you lift weights? Would you like to be in a glutamine study?
It becomes a survey study with an unvalidated means of assessing hypertrophy.
I love it.
The alternative to exercise science just doesn't seem better.
It doesn't seem better. Science is the surest path to the truth. That does not mean it's the fastest. That doesn't mean that at the beginning it gives you the most data.
Or all the answers.
Well, sure, shit doesn't give you all the answers. And science versus going by feel is a false dichotomy. You need to steer within the lines of what science says is probably bullshit outside of the lines. And within that, you need to use inference from science, best practices from science, and best practices from actual hypertrophy trainees. Old-timer wisdom belongs in there too, because a motherfucker's got a lot of shit right. You mix that all together, use your best judgment, now you got a good plan. And if you don't second-guess yourself all the goddamn time, you're probably going to make some gains. So the smartest people are using science as well as practical experience. There's no reason to separate the two. And all the IFBB pros that people like to trot out who don't use science, their coaches use science. That's how come they credit their coach when they win the Olympia. Science is not replaceable if you want your best results. But just science by itself isn't going to go pick up barbells for you. And it's sure as shit going to get real complicated if you don't know how to appraise it.
Beautiful. Dr. Mike, anything else to add on exercise science and whether or not it's killing your gains?
You see what I'm saying? These gains look dead to you, big homie? We out here doing science, you feel me?
Where can people find you?
RP Strength on YouTube. Give us a click. You'll see my face and I'll be angry about something and rambling. and hit subscribe. Maybe you won't hate yourself as much as you do now after. Maybe more than unsubscribe.
All I notice are your baby blue eyes on the thumbnails.
I had them removed from a live child and installed on me while I waited.
Worthwhile sacrifice.
For the child it was. For me it was a Tuesday.
For the channel too. Doing numbers.
Yeah, no,
for
for
the
sure.
eyes.
It's all about the channel.
See you later.